as the heavens open, I'll tell you about another one of my favourite rigs, the Paternoster Rig. This rig is primarily used for live baits, and it's a way of anchoring with a lead, anchoring a rig so that the bait revolves around the setup. Great method early part of the season, and it can also be used for dead baits as well, so don't think it's just a live bait rig. It can work really well with suspended, maybe even balanced baits. So we start with a lead. The heavier the better within reason, and the reason why I say that is you've got to be able to cast it without it breaking off the weak link that we're attached to. The reason for the weak link is if a fish takes the bait and starts to run and the lead catches up in the weed or on a snag or on a gravel bar, it needs to be able to break so that the fish is then directly on your main line. So here I've probably got 2.5 ounce lead. Sometimes I'll go up to 3 ounces if I've got a big bait, and I've got 5 pound monofilament, which is pretty strong. You can go slightly lighter, but you've got to get that balance with the casting. The weak link is then attached to the Paternoster boom, which, as you can see, is a 2-armed piece of plastic kit. One which runs through the main line, or in this case the up trace, and the arm that you tie the weak link to. Now if I can put that in the water, I can show you how the rig actually works. So you've got your weak link and the lead straight to the bottom. You've got your main line and your up trace going to the float, and then you've got your normal trace with your bait on, and you've got flexibility all the way around. The fish can swim round and round, it can swim up and down, and it can even pull a certain amount of the up trace through the rig, through the boom. So it's very flexible, and that bait will look as natural as you can get it as it swims around. The trace in this case is made out of 40 pounds titanium. The reason for that is it's obviously it's strong, but it's pretty rigid as well, and you don't want too much flexibility in the trace wire at this point, because it's going to there's quite a few opportunities for it to get tangled up. So if you can keep that as rigid as possible, all the better. On this rig I've got semi-barbed size 4 ESOX hooks with a little bit of shrink tube just to keep it nice and tidy, and that's a great trace. That's then linked with a very strong safe lock link. It's very important that this bit here is extremely strong. You don't want any of this breaking when you've got a fish on, for obvious reasons. From the lock, you've got the up trace. Now on my Paternoster rigs, I like to have a very long up trace, and the reason for this is that I put a stop knot just about 1/3 of the way up, and these 2 beads run up to there and it stops. So if the pike takes the bait and runs, you've got a foot and a half of flexibility before it feels the weight of the rig. And I think at that stage of the take, it's really important that they don't suddenly get banged straight onto the weight and the float and feel it, because they'll eject the bait. So that's really quite important. So there's a little bit of flexibility on the boom there. The reason why it's such a long up trace is because when the pike has run that extra bit of flexibility, you still want the up trace to be longer than the trace itself. So if you can imagine, the pike has taken the bait, it runs away with its mouth still partly open. If by any chance it gets it in its mouth, it still gets the up trace rather than the main line. So it's really important for safety. We then move on to the float. Now, I've seen a lot of people in the past use great big floats for the Paternoster, and it's just not necessary. It just makes the whole thing more cumbersome. A nice little polyball like that will keep, believe it or not, will keep the whole rig nice and buoyant with even a fairly big bait. Don't think that a big bait you need a massive, great big polyball. It's not the case. That will keep plenty of buoyancy in the rig, and it'll keep a bait nice and high in the water. Finish it all off with the stop knot. The stop knot and the bead obviously stop the rig, and that affects the depth that you'll be fishing. So that's the rig. When do we use the Paternoster rig? Well, it's a great rig on rivers because you can set it up and the bait will flow with the river and keep it well away from the rig, but you're still anchored on the bottom. So it's a great river rig. It's also brilliant for reservoirs and gravel pits and also the fens, places like the fens. I've used a slightly different rig to this on the fens, more free running, because the pike on there, it's so shallow that you need a free running rig, but this one is great for gravel pits and reservoirs. A lot of people will shy away from the Paternoster rig because I guess as far as pipe rigs are concerned, it is quite technical and you can get in a bit of a tangle if you don't use the right setup. But if you do use the right equipment and you get it set up properly, it can be a fantastic way of presenting live baits and even dead baits.